Welcome, everyone. My name is Donna Reed, and I am an author, and I just wrote a book called F Words. I have to tell you that because I forgot to totally introduce myself at one of the meetings where I was speaking. So, I've been working on this book for about 2 years, and I want to tell you something that happened recently in Italy. It was the second night that we were there. There were 10 of us in this group, and we were mostly strangers. Everybody kind of knew one person, but they didn't know everybody. And the person who was in charge, her name was Jen, who was doing our painting class that we went for, she'd given us each a gift. And those gifts had a word on the bag. She didn't know us. So the second night at dinner, she was going around the table and she was asking us if we looked at the word and what we thought and what it meant to us. And she started, her word was trust. And then we went around, and I was about the fourth or fifth person. And my word was brave. And I don't tend to think of myself as brave. I tend to think of, gladiators and I don't know, movies, just not kind of day-to-day living. But to be fair, I've had a life where I've had to be pretty brave. So in the midst of this, we had two men, there were 8 women, and I sarcastically made the comment that men aren't very deep. They don't share their feelings. So a couple people down from me was a man that I knew peripherally. His word was honor, and he did a great job. And then the last guy, his name was Chris, and Chris's word was wonder. And Chris said, I was going to say I was wonderful, but since Donna said that men aren't deep, I'm going to share that I wonder how I can be so fortunate to have been 25 years sober and come from a line of 4 generations of alcoholism. And I wonder how this beautiful woman across the table could have lived with me for these 25 years. And then he had already commented about a 14-year-old son, and what we weren't real sure of what the relationship was, but he wondered what the future might hold for that. And then he looked at me and he goes, so there you go, Donna. Men can be deep. And it was really emotional, you guys. It was 10 people who had just met, sitting around a table, having really deep conversation, and we barely knew each other. And that kind of cemented us, for not only that week, but I think long term. My point in telling that story is that we can text, we can email, we can do all of that. But if we don't talk in person, then our stories are never really going to get passed down. And so let me tell you how this book started. I was on a Zoom call. I'd been doing Zoom calls with my family predominantly through COVID. And after one of the calls in the summer of 2022, the next day, one of my brothers called me. And he had kind of worried about something all night long, and I just never would have done that. So after the phone call, I was just like, wow, family. And I don't know how the rest of you feel, but my siblings and I, sometimes I wonder if genetically we really came from the same parents. The truth is, we are. But after that call, I decided I needed to write a book called F Words. And it started with family. And then I told one of my friends, I said, Evie, I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be 52 F words, all like one a week, short stories about how we use language, because I think it's important. So once you start focusing on something, we have a reticular activating system, we have a RAS, and then everybody starts telling about it. So if you think about when you're looking for a car and then all of a sudden you notice everybody else that drives that car because they're next to you at the stoplight, or you see their car in the parking lot. Well, that's what happened with F words. People started texting me, asking me, and saying, did you put this word in the book? Did you put this word in the book? And so I'm going to tell you why the word frog is in the book. I have a distant cousin, Kurt, who I had asked him if he would illustrate some of the words because he went to the Cleveland Institute of Art. We've seen each other twice in 35 years. And so I asked him to illustrate some words. Well, he came back and there was a picture of a frog. That was not one of the words that I had asked him to illustrate. And a week or two later, he goes, I don't think I followed the rules. But in the meantime, I wrote about a frog, and that is in the book. And it's his picture that he wrote, because I got to thinking about how frogs are one of the creatures that start out one way and end up another way. They're a water, they're like an amphibian creature, and then they're walking on land, they're hopping on land. We as humans are the same, right? We start out one way and we change through life. So that's why frog is in the book. And then I talked to a realtor in Memphis, and she said, "Are y'all doing fixin'?" And I was like, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. And she goes, "Well, fixin' matters. Fixin's important." So guess what? Fixin' is in the book along with fix. I kind of cheated. I did fix and fixin' at the same time. So the more I worked on the book, the more I thought about language, and the more I figured there had to be a point to this. I wanted people to think about the importance of oral communication, not just texts and emojis. So there are so many words that in the book that I kind of left a question for you at the end to think about. I also wanted art to go with my book, and I had initially asked my son to illustrate the words, but anybody in here creative? If you're creative, having somebody assign you something to do is harder than if you just want to do it. So Adam wasn't really interested in illustrating all the words, so I put a message out to the internet, to the Facebook world. Some of you are aware of that. And I asked for help. I asked for photographers and for artists. So as you look through the book, you're going to see different artists, different imagery, different people who all had to give me permission to put it in the book. And let me just tell you, when I asked for the word window, and you're right, window is not an F word, but in French it is. It's fenêtre. And in Spanish it is. And in Italian it is. So I wanted to write about windows. And when I asked for pictures of windows, I got about 105 photos, you guys. And for some people, it was the window of where they lived. For some of it was with kids. For some of it was in the plane. Some of it was in their car. Some of them were church windows. So I actually inserted more than one. There's 6 or 7 extra pictures in there related to windows. The more I did this, the more I also was thinking about language and origins and why we speak how we speak. I had met a man who I asked him how he pronounced Creek. And he said creek. And I said, no, crick. So where I grew up, we went to the crick. We didn't go to the creek. And then he said, well, how do you pronounce mild? And I said, mild. And he goes, no, not mild, mile. It's a mile down the road. It's mile wings. There's no D. And it made me think, right? Our culture, our education level, our economic level, how much we've traveled the world, all those things affect language and how we speak. Not to mention generations, right? There are 5 or 6 generations in the workforce right now, and everybody's a little bit different. So for instance, have any of you ever used LOL? Okay. Did you ever text someone and they thought it was lots of love, but you were saying laugh out loud? This is the misinterpretation of abbreviations. Think, for instance, about a CD, because if you were alive, my first CD was a compact disc, and then it was a certificate of deposit. And now in real estate, it's a closing disclosure. If I just say CD, the person on the other hand may not know what it was. There was an edition of Psychology Today, and there was an article about the science and the power of conversation. They said conversation is the ancient technology for aligning our brains so that we can be on the same page. Conversation is the ancient technology for aligning our brains so that we can be on the same page. I want to share a story about something in my office. There's a young man, Eric, who I've been mentoring, and one day we were in his truck and we were driving up to Casa Grande, and I was on the phone with an agent, and she had asked me about the price of a house, and I said, if I had had my druthers, I would have made the house 625 instead of 675,000. And when I hung up the phone, Eric said, what are druthers? And I was like, Now the lady on the other end knew, so I knew that she knew. She came from a generation that understood what I was saying. And I said, well, would rather, drather, druthers. And so then his mom called, and his mom and stepdad were on the phone, and he goes, you guys know what druthers are? And if I recall, one of them did and one of them didn't. And then we talked about couch, and I asked him if he had ever heard divan or Davenport or sofa. And most of the 20-somethings in the world, they know couch. They never sat on a divan or a Davenport or a sofa. They're all pieces of furniture, but they represent so much more. They represent history and trends and fashion and conversation pieces. They're just a lot more than a couch. So as I mentioned, languages affected across generations. If I was to ask a young person what a party line was, they might say that it was the line on the cruise ship to get a drink. Well, for me, the party line was the first phone that I had where I could hear what was happening with the neighbor down the street. And then it went to a private line and then to a flip phone and ultimately a cell phone with a camera. Oh, and you can text. I went kicking and screaming into texting. I told my children I was never going to text. That's a lie. I do. So as Eric and some of the other young people in my office gave me their opinions of what words mean, I realized more and more how we read things in our head and how we read what we think without hearing their words because we're not in the room with them. Our brain processes things that make sense in our world. So I have a couple people here that are going to share some of their thoughts. And the first one is Geo. Geo is a young woman. She's 27 and she has the book and she's read a few things. And I'm going to share with you what she wrote. She said, "Good morning, Donna. I was doing some of my Saturday morning self-care reset, which includes reading. I read the word fool, and so far it has been the one that I resonated the most with. It got me thinking that your 20s are full of foolish choices, behavior, and memories. I'm not immune to being a fool. There are plenty of times I can refer to where I know I was the fool in the story. However, I appreciate that you mentioned how oftentimes the fools in the story are the brightest and teach the intended lesson. I'd like to think of myself that way. All the foolish things I've done or said have only brought me to this point in my life right now. Had I never played with the fool in my own story, I would have never grown or learned anything. You also referenced the Elvis Presley lyric, which hit home for me. When I got engaged at 19, my sister sang that song to us. Little did I know then just how foreshadowing that small detail was. I often think that the whole first half of my young adulthood was embarrassing and a mistake, but I think I was playing the fool in order to make me a better person. Anyway, I thought I would share my thoughts with the author. Thank you for including that word." So what I'm finding is that every word impacts people differently. Now I'm going to have a friend, Larice, and she's going to speak and she's going to talk about the word freedom. And she is a retired Air Force chief, so a female in the military, third generation, and freedom just really, really resonates with her. Okay, that's going to be Larice now talking. Since we're here in church, I also wanted to spend a few minutes sharing what I wrote about the word faith. And I think that it's super timely based on the fact that we've just had the elections. So I'm going to read about faith, but I also want you who are here who have traveled to think about frescoes and feelings. I want you to think about the importance of a fresco and Michelangelo creating something that was going to last for thousands of years. But we are making up our own story looking at it. So if Michelangelo was talking to his peers, he might have been telling them how tired he was of laying on his back, or how hard it was to get the perfect color blue on the ceiling, or how 4 years later he needed a chiropractor. I don't know if there was a chiropractor, any of those things. So that and feelings, because we live in a world of emojis where we put little smiley faces and hearts and things like that. And my concern is that that's going to be our future if we don't talk to each other, if kids don't get off their phones, if we don't get off our devices. So now sometimes parents talk to each other, or to their kids from upstairs to downstairs. There were young people that weren't even in social groups for a number of years during COVID. And we need to make sure that all of us, every person, young or old, has the opportunity to share their stories, to pass down the tales. Oral communication can be lost. We need to literally laugh out loud and not pretend that we're laughing out loud, or ROFL, rolling on the floor laughing, or LMAO, laughing your ass off, because the truth is we're probably not doing that. We're probably just laughing. Let me pause here now and read you what I wrote about faith. It's December 28th as I write this. I'm home watching one of the gazillions, many Christmas movies that were created to be seen in what I suppose is 1 month between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I've seen Santa and reindeer and love matches galore. I've seen snow in almost every country around the world. I've seen families who argue and then reunite. And I've just seen a little bit about faith. Faith is one of those words that's often connected to religion. I would venture to guess that it's used more in church than anywhere else. I It might be used in a synagogue or a mosque or in other places in humanity that something or someone greater than ourself exists. I often hear songs in my head as I'm writing, and tonight I'm hearing from Jesus Christ Superstar, try not to get worried, try not to turn on to problems that upset you. Don't you know everything's all right now, everything's fine. I started a little low there. Faith, in a song from my youth, reminds us to be open to the possibility that life is going to be okay and that we're not alone and in control. Faith can mean trust or belief in a higher power, or just that you as a person have done every single thing that you can to make sure something happens or occurs the way you want it to, and then simultaneously understanding it may not. Life simply has a way of happening with or without our plans, our hope, and our beliefs. I've heard people laugh or grimace when faith is discussed. They tend to be very pragmatic and realistic. And yet around the holidays, we perpetuate the belief that a man who lives at the North Pole flies around the world in a sleigh and brings gifts to children everywhere. We want our kids to believe that until we don't. And then we want them to grow up. So what about the faith of a child learning to walk? Trusting that if those bigger human beings in the room believe I can walk, I probably can. Do I think that's exactly what's going through the mind of a 1-year-old? Not really. But honestly, something like that is happening. Or the kid who gets on a horse for the first time because mom and dad tell them that it'll be fine. What about the faith that we have each and every time we get in the car to go someplace? We, for the most part, believe our car will go and we will reach our destination in a specific amount of time. When we send money electronically, and I write this a bit tongue-in-cheek, we have faith that we'll reach its destination. But let's be real, 99% of us have no idea how that works. How is faith different than trust? I believe trust is earned. Trust requires experience to tell us, teach us, tutor us into a place of okay. Faith, not so much. Faith is a blind construct. Faith requires no proof. This writer, this woman, believes that faith is a gift. Faith allows us to keep our rose-colored glasses on for just a bit. It allows us to not get lost in life events that push us backwards rather than thrusting us forward. I embrace faith in all aspects of my life and with my whole being, and I hope you will too. I felt like that was super important, especially after our election right now. As I wrap this up, I want to tell you just a couple of other little stories about communication and words and speaking to each other. When my mom was sick, for about 6 months, she was in a hospital bed in what would have been the dining room. And my dad had a shop, and he would come in from the shop. And he never left the mudroom and came into the kitchen. He might have been coming and asking me how mom was, or he might have been asking me to make another cup of coffee. But he would lean in the doorway. And I can picture my dad there with duct tape on his shirt pocket, duct tape on his belt, probably duct tape on his shoes because he felt duct tape fixed everything. And my parents died before text messaging. I don't miss any kind of thing like that. What I miss is the conversations, the coffee on the porch with my dad when mom was sick, sitting on the porch swing, him coming in from the shop. And then my mom thinking about being in the choir next to her or our trip to, Eric had moved to San Antonio when mom and I got to go to San Antonio. I miss the conversations and the stories that we shared. I'm going to end with one other word, the word failure. When my father was dating the woman that he married after my mom passed, I was switching jobs or doing something different. And she said to me, oh, maybe now you'll stick with something for a change. I was so aghast. I couldn't believe that anybody perceived me as a person who was a failure because I never felt that way. but it's been like 25 to 30 years, and I can still hear that in my head. And I think that sometimes we forget that presidents failed many times before they became presidents, and that the actor who seems suddenly famous spent 30 years before you knew their name, and they failed forward. I feel like every failure that someone has in their life is a learning experience, and it's pushing us towards what we were intended to do. So this book, this F word book, began 2 years ago, and I focused, and I was fastidious as Donna can be, which those of you know me know that I'm not that fastidious, but I finished. So I focused, I was fastidious, and I finished the book. I want you to go back to that story I told you at the beginning with the man who had the word wonder. I want you to think about words this week, and I wonder what your word will be. And it may be an F word, and it may not. I'm Donna Reed. I'm an author, and I wrote a book called F Words. Thank you guys for coming.